Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our CAT 2024 series. We'll be looking at the VA section of slot 3. The difficulty level to a certain extent depends upon the test taker. It depends on what appeals to you to a large extent. But yes, overall, the language is rather complex. It's dense. The text is dense. Getting through it is fairly difficult. Yes. So let's take a look at this. We're starting with this particular passage. It's a summary-based question. It talks about lyric poetry and Marxism, right? So seemingly two completely opposite things. Yes. So let's see what the passage says. Lyric poetry is a genre of private meditation rather than public commitment. Okay, so the first sentence tells us that lyric poetry is a genre. It is a category that belongs to private meditation, something that's personal, something that is private, something that we keep to ourselves, something that is within our thoughts, or maybe something that reflects our thoughts. Yes, the impulse rather than public commitment, something that we do aim towards the public, right? That seems to be the indication. The impulse in Marxism. Okay, so the impulse, the idea, the thing that drives Marxism, yes, towards changing a society deemed unacceptable in its basic design, would seem to place demands on lyric poetry that such poetry, with its tendency towards the personal, okay, we already know that it more of private meditation rather than public commitment. So the impulse in Marxism that wants to change society, right, that seems unacceptable to Marxism, right, would require lyric poetry, which has a tendency towards the personal, the private, the small scale, and the idiosyncratic. Idiosyncratic is eccentric, right? Something that is completely dependent upon the person. Yes, so it is, it has nothing to do with the group as a whole, right? So that's the idea here. That's the way in which idiosyncratic has been used here. Okay, could never answer. So, what Marxism expects of lyric poetry is something that lyric poetry, the way it is made, right, that is with the tendency towards the personal, the small scale, and the idiosyncratic, could never answer, right? There is within Marxism, however. Okay, so there is this word however here, which indicates a contradiction to the previous idea. Okay, so there is within Marxism, however, also a strand of thought that would locate in lyric poetry alternative, right? So a strand of thought that would locate in lyric poetry alternative modes of perception and description that call forth a vision of worlds at odds with a repressive reality, or that draw attention to the workings of ideology within the hegemonic. Hegemonic is predominant, superior. Okay, superior not in the sense of superior, inferior, but the one that dominates, the one that rules. Okay, so he says, or she says, within Marxism, there's also a certain way of thinking that finds in lyric poetry other modes of perception and description that does sort of, seem to fight against or go against repressive realities, or, call attention to the workings of ideology within the, meaning basically rebel against the predominant culture or the dominant culture. Okay, the poetic imagination, yes, the poetic imagination may indeed deflect larger social concerns. So it may not really, pay a lot of attention to it, may veer away from it, may move to the side larger social concerns, but it may also be implicitly, okay, it may also be implicitly critical and utopian. Okay, critical is criticizing, finding fault, pointing out drawbacks, pointing out disadvantages, right? So it could be in that sense. And utopian. Utopian is idealistic. Okay, so these are the main points here, right? Which tells us basically that it is something that is generally considered private and personal, right? Something that reflects the private and personal, but and as such, not something that Marxism would not something that would be compatible with Marxism, right? But Marxism also identifies or sees within lyric poetry something that has a tendency to fight against oppressive or repressive culture. Okay, so Let's see what the options tell us. The first option says Marxism makes unreasonable demands on lyric poetry. No, right? There is no sense of unreasonable demands because it is, Marxism sees in poetry, would locate in lyric poetry, it says, right? It doesn't say that it demands of lyric poetry. It sees, it locates in lyric poetry alternative modes of perception. That means it's there within lyric poetry. It's not that it is making demands. Okay. However, lyric poetry has its own merits that are largely ignored by Marxism. No, it doesn't say anything about merits of poetry being ignored by Marxism. So definitely not option 1. Option 2 says the focus of lyric poetry is largely personal, while that of Marxism, up to that point, is okay. While that of Marxism is bringing a change in society, okay. But again, that's not the main point of the summary, right? Rather, that's not the main point of the passage. Yes, it is part of the passage, but it is not the ultimate point that the passage is making. Unless the difference is resolved, right? No, there is no question of resolving the difference because Marxism, the passage very clearly says that Marxism sees within poetry. So there's one aspect of lyric poetry which Marxism does not seem to agree with, but Marxism also sees within poetry another aspect which is compatible with what it would want. Yes, so there is no question of resolving the difference there. Marxism has internal contradictions. See, it says there is within Marxism, and that is precisely why this particular option has been given. Okay, so here you see the word within, all right, but it is not saying there are contradictions within Marxism due to which one strand of Marxism sees no merit in, look at that, it's an exaggeration. Yes, so it doesn't say that it does not see any merit while another appreciates the alternative. I would say the last part of 3 is probably appropriate to the passage, but the first part is completely veering away from the passage. Okay, as such, our answer will be option 4, which says the focus of lyric poetry as personal may not seem compatible, good word, with Marxism. Yes, that's what the second sentence says. Yes, then, however, it is possible to envision, yes, see, visualize lyric poetry as a symbol of resistance against an oppressive culture. So it covers the points that have been underlined, that I have underlined in the passage. Yes, so 4 is a good summary. Let's see. Humans have managed to tweak is adjust the underlying biology. So this is another summary question. Okay, so they've managed to tweak, okay, humans, mind you, the underlying biology of various plants and animals to produce high-tech crops and microbes. But, okay, so they've managed to adjust, bring about small changes, yes, but regulating these entities is complicated. Why? As the framework of policies and procedures are outdated and not flexible enough to adapt to emerging technology, right? So it is the framework of policies and procedures is outdated and not flexible enough to adapt, right? That is the problem, that it is not able to change itself to keep up with emerging technology. Okay, the question, yes, so ultimately the question is whether regulation will ever be able to keep up with human innovation. To regulate, right? So the question is these 3 things: to regulate living things, okay, which are apt to be unpredictable and unique, to capture all the, so this is where we come to another important point, to capture all the potential risks when new biological entities are introduced or when they pass on variations of their genes. Okay, so this is what the passage is talking about. It's talking, so this is a simpler passage, easier to understand, right? Again, you focus on the keywords of this. This is definitely easier to do and less time consuming. Okay, so the idea here is that humans have managed to bring about changes in living entities, right? But regulating these entities is complicated. Why? Because the framework is outdated and it cannot change fast enough or keep up with the emerging technology, right? So will regulation be able to keep up with human innovation, right? Especially when living things, biological entities keep changing. Okay, so let's see. The problem with formulating regulation for innovation in the scientific arena is that it is impossible to imagine the outcomes or risks related to the outcomes of all the research. Yes. The problem with this, while it does seem to have some of the keywords, right? It does have formulating regulation, it does have the problem, it does have imagining the outcomes or risks, but it becomes a little broad in scope because it says outcomes of all the research, and it also says the scientific arena, which makes it a little broad in scope. It talks specifically about high-tech crops, so the underlying biology of various plants and animals to produce high-tech crops and microbes. Yes. So what is the field of science? It is talking about a specific field of science. It is not talking about all science. It's not talking about the scientific arena in general. Right. It doesn't even, option 1 doesn't even mention the human innovation where living beings, biological entities, one of those words or phrases should have been used, right? So that's why option 1 doesn't quite make the cut. Then option 2 says the mercurial nature. Mercurial is ever changing, unpredictable nature of biological entities, okay, better, calls for scientists to shape the regulations governing emerging technology with regular calibration is adjustment, to handle variations in the field. Okay, now regular calibration would imply, okay, while I would still accept that to a certain extent, I would say to shape the regulations doesn't really work. Shape the regulations would mean that the regulation is there, right, for everything. But that's one of the points that the author is making, that regulating these entities is complicated, right? Why? Because the framework is outdated and not flexible enough. Okay, so while regular calibration might imply, okay, it needs to be flexible as such, but to shape the regulations again does not. And again, it is not really just the mercurial nature of biological entities. It is leaving out one aspect here, which is that of human innovation. Remember, we had underlined that point also, right? So it also talks about human innovation. Why are these biological entities changing? It's not just that they're changing by themselves. It's also because humans, how does a passage start? Humans have managed to tweak the underlying biology, right? So that is the idea. So it's not the nature of the biological entities by itself, it is what human beings are doing with them, right? That is why regulation is difficult. Okay, so 2 is out. Current regulation of biotechnology is outdated. Okay, yes, mentions biotechnology, which is basically the application of technology, the tweaking of the underlying biology. Yes, okay, that works. Outdated, yes, because regulation is outdated, yes. But it is debatable if we can create a framework, imaginative and flexible, yes, again, words mentioned in the passage, to cover all contingencies in this fast changing area. Yes, this seems to cover the points that we have talked about. Okay, we have noted in the passage. Let's just take a look at 4. A new framework of rules and procedures for regulating the most recent research emerging from biotechnology is urgently needed. No. Right? New framework, urgently needed, all exaggerations. I would say, if anything, it is the last part, to keep up with this rapidly changing discipline, it says. Discipline would imply, the field of study. Okay, yes, but it's not really saying that. I might still take the last part of 4, right? Okay, but if we really get down to it, it's not really the rapidly changing discipline, the field of study as such, that is talked about. It is more that new biological entities are introduced when they pass on variations of their genes. Okay, it is those things, as new things emerge, right, it becomes difficult to bring about regulation in the field of study. Okay, so regulation in the field of study, but it is the more than the changing of the field of study itself, it is the changes in the biological entities that are hard to keep up with. All right, so I would say 4 is veering off on a tangent. Option 3 captures the passage very well. We have here our first passage. Okay, now this passage is it actually makes for rather interesting reading, though there's maybe a paragraph in between where the language does become, rather the sentences become long, the language is a little dense. Yes, but overall I think this passage is quite readable. What is this passage about? This passage is talking about space exploration and the effort by countries to keep the space explorations hygienic. Yes, and the amount of money that is spent on that. The author brings about the argument of whether it is necessary to incur this kind of expense, especially when there has really not been a hint of life seen during any of these explorations. All right. So let's start with the first question because it deals with the first paragraph. Okay, and it is a tone question. Yes. So the opinion of or the attitude of the author is what we are looking for. Right. So what does it say? The author's overall tone in the first paragraph can be described as. What are we looking for? We're looking for the opinion or the attitude of the author in the first paragraph. Let's read it. There is a group in the space community who view the solar system not as an opportunity to expand human potential, but as a nature preserve. Okay, so they don't see it as a way of expanding human potential, more exploration, new knowledge, right? Expansion of knowledge, understanding newer things. No, that's not how they see it. They see it as a nature preserve, something that is to be conserved, something that is to be protected. Forever the provenance. Okay, forever the provenance is something that belongs to an elite group of scientists and their sanitary robotic probes. Okay, probes are the machines that they are using to find stuff, right? So they're sanitary, clean, hygienic probes. These planetary protection advocates call for avoiding harmful contamination of celestial bodies. Okay, so their mantra is that there should not be any harmful contamination of celestial, right? Meaning the spatial bodies, right? Under this regime, okay, NASA incurs great expense sterilizing robotic probes in order to prevent the contamination of entirely theoretical biospheres. Okay, so he says because there is this one group of people, this one faction of people that call for prevention of contamination of celestial bodies, and because of that, he says NASA it incurs great expense sterilizing robotic probes in order to prevent contamination of entirely theoretical biospheres. Okay, so biospheres indicating that there is life there. All right, so entirely theoretical, meaning it's not been proven yet. They've not found life there yet, right? So just because there is this group that calls for prevention of contamination, he says NASA incurs great expense. All right, so the author seems to be a little I won't say disapproving, but he seems to be he wonders whether it is absolutely necessary. He says they're entirely theoretical biospheres, right? So in that case, why should this kind of expense be incurred, right? Is it really necessary? Yes, that seems to be the tone of the author. Okay, so what options do we have? The first one says indifferent to the elitism of a few scientists aiming to corner space exploration. This is completely beyond the scope of this passage. For one thing, indifferent as a tone is something you find it's a popular choice for a tone question, but if the author really is indifferent, yes, would he or she bother to write about that topic at all? Right, so it seems a little contradictory to me. The reason indifferent is a popular choice, I would say. You find it in quite a few of the tone questions when they do come up. Is probably, I think, I've seen that there is a slight misunderstanding of the word indifferent. Right, indifferent has nothing to do with different. Yes, it is not the opposite of different, isn't it? Indifferent means one doesn't care. Right? So if one doesn't care, why is one even writing about it? Yes. So it seems a little strange to me. Yes. So that, and of course, if you look at the latter half of option 1, elitism of a few scientists aiming to corner space exploration, no. Right? It is mentioned that there is an elite group of scientists. That is said in reference to the people who think that it should just be kept to an elite group of scientists. Nobody else should be allowed to touch space exploration. That is the context in which it is mentioned. Yes. So option 1 is definitely out. Option 2 says approving of the amount of money NASA spends to restrict the spread of contamination in space? No. Since he says entirely theoretical biospheres, and he says NASA incurs great expense sterilizing robotic probes in order to prevent the contamination, the author doesn't approve. Okay. The third option says skeptical. Skeptical is questioning, right? Asking questions, expressing doubt about the excessive efforts to sanitize planets where life has not yet been proven, okay, not yet been proven to exist. Yes, right? So it talks about efforts, yes, great expense, sanitize planets, right? Prevent contamination where life has not yet been proven. So if it is theoretical, it is still not yet been proven. Yes. So option 3 works very well, especially because of the word skeptical. Okay. Then you have option 4, which says equivocal. Equivocal is uncertain about the reasons extended by the group of scientists seeking to limit space exploration. Well, he doesn't really mention the reason, right? It only says that they seem to think that it belongs to an elite group of scientists, right? Elite refers to superior, of the highest order, etc., etc. Yes. So that doesn't work. Therefore, option 3, skeptical, is the best choice. Okay, we have the second question. The contrasting reasons to the Chinese and Israeli contaminations of lunar space. Okay, now as you can see, the first 2 questions for this passage at least are specific questions. They give you very clear references to the passage. So even if you should always take a look at the questions first. So you could always read that specific paragraph, maybe read, since it mentions a paragraph, if necessary, read the first sentence of the next paragraph. You'll get the tone, you'll get the context. Yes. So you could try answering these questions this way also. Okay. So this says the contrasting reactions to Chinese and Israeli contaminations of lunar space. This is in paragraph 3. Okay, so let's take a look at the paragraph now. The other likely targets of human exploration, development, and settlement are moon and the asteroids exist in a desiccated, desiccated is dried up. Okay, this is where the word is. Radiation soaked realm of hard vacuum and extreme temperature variations that would kill nearly anything. It's also important to note that many international competitors, okay, so here comes the point that the author is making. Okay, many international competitors will ignore the demands of these protection extremists in any case. Okay, so there are many, there are many countries who are competing for space exploration, and there are many countries who will actually ignore these people completely. The extremists are protesting, saying that you need to protect it, but there may be countries that don't listen to them. Okay, so he gives an example. For example, China recently sent a terrarium to the moon. Okay, so this is the example that the question is referring to, the moon, and germinated a plant seed with unsurprisingly no protest from its own scientific community. Right? So its own scientific community did not protest. China did that. It sent a terrarium to the moon, germinated a plant seed, right? Which is something these people are saying, no, don't put anything there. Don't send anything from the earth to the space. Okay. In contrast, when it was recently revealed that a researcher had surreptitiously is quietly, secretively, okay, researcher had surreptitiously super resilient microscopic tardigrades aboard the ill-fated Israeli Bereshit lunar probe, a firestorm was unleashed, right? So don't get caught up by the first part of that sentence. That's just information, right? The point that the author is making is that you take these words into account, that a researcher had surreptitiously smuggled. Okay, he was not supposed to take the tardigrades, but he did, right? What happened then? A firestorm was unleashed within the space community, right? So the Chinese germinated a plant seed, and there was no protest from its own community, from its own scientific community. But when Israel did something, a researcher from Israel did something like this, there was a whole lot of protest. Okay. So the previous sentence before the example says it is also important to note that many international competitors will ignore the demands of these protection extremists in any case. All right. So what do the contrasting reactions of these contaminations indicate or do? Okay, are valid as the contamination of the lunar environment from animal sources is far greater than from plants. Yes, so by the time you say is valid, first of all, the author is not saying whether it is valid or invalid, the contrasting reactions. Yes, and also animal sources greater than from that of plants, we don't know, right? So there is no that is stretching the passage. Yes, then the contrasting reactions to the Chinese and Israeli contaminations of lunar space are evidence of China's reasonable approach. Okay, is there anything in the passage that says China's approach was reasonable? We don't know. We only know that its own scientific community, meaning the Chinese scientific community, did not protest. Did anybody else protest? We don't know. Yes, so reveal global biases prevalent in the attitudes towards countries. This is again completely beyond the scope of the passage. Okay, so the fourth option, which says indicate that national scientists may have different sensitivities to issues of biosphere protection. Yes, so within the country they thought it was fine, but the international community, on the other hand, within the larger space community, there was a hullabaloo, right? So protest. Okay, let's look at this. The author mentions all of the following reasons. Yes, so the previous two questions could be answered by looking at specific paragraphs, but here you have a more generalized question which says all of the following reasons to dismiss concerns about contaminating Mars except. Okay, so let's see what the options are. Efforts to contain contamination on Mars are likely to be derailed as competitor countries may not follow similar restrictions. Yes, right. This is something that is mentioned in the passage as a reason to dismiss concerns, right? So the author says that, okay, one country might obey it, might follow the rules, or might adhere to what the protection extremists are talking about, but the other countries may not have the same attitude towards it, right? So in that case, yes, that is definitely something that the author would see as a reason to dismiss concerns. Okay, so 1 doesn't apply. Option 2, because we are looking for the one that the author doesn't mention as a reason to dismiss concerns. Yes, the second one says the use of similar probes on astronomical bodies like the moon have had little effect on the environment. Okay, this is something, right? Similar probes. Yes, this is something that is nowhere mentioned or indicated in the passage. Yes, therefore this is the answer. Okay, let's look at the third one. The lack of evidence of living organisms on Mars makes possible contamination from earthly microbes a moot point. Yes, moot point means it's there's no point in discussing it, right? So the author mentions, remember in the first paragraph, right? He says entirely theoretical biospheres. Okay, so if you look at the second paragraph, there again the author discusses it in detail. He talks about Mars, right? He says transporting bacteria would matter if Mars were the vital world once imagined by astronomers who mistook optical illusions for canals. Nobody wants to expose Martians to measles, but sadly, robotic exploration reveals a bleak, rusted landscape. Okay, so if you look at the second paragraph, yes, robotic exploration reveals a bleak, rusted landscape, lacking oxygen and flooded with radiation, ready to sterilize any earthly microbes. So he says there's no there's no life there. Simple life might exist underground or down at the bottom of a deep canyon, but it has been very hard to find with robots. Okay, that means there's been no life found. Yes, the upsides from human exploration and development of Mars clearly outweigh the welfare of purely speculative Martian fungi. Yes, so if you look at the second paragraph, you can very definitely rule out option 3. Okay, because it is one of the reasons to dismiss concerns. Then, earlier explorations have already contaminated pristine space environments. This is mentioned in the first line of the last but one paragraph, which says NASA's previous human exploration efforts made no serious attempt at sterility with little notice. Nobody paid much attention at that time, right? It didn't really, so it may have contaminated already pristine space environments. Yes, so 2 is the only one that is not mentioned as a reason to dismiss concerns. All right, the author is unlikely to disagree with any of the following except, meaning, so you invert that. As I said, this is a tricky question because the question itself is twisted. Yes. So what does it mean when when the question says unlikely to disagree with any of the following except? The author is likely to agree with all of the following except. Okay. So let's see what we have. Space contamination should be minimized until the possibility of life on the astronomical body being explored is ruled out, right? So the author is talking about Mars. He also mentions the lunar exploration, yes, but the author very clearly indicates that no life has been found, right? So he says maybe simple life might exist underground is what he says in the second paragraph, right? He says simple life might exist, very little possibility, yes, but it has been very hard to find with robots. And he very clearly says the upsides from human exploration and development of Mars, okay, upsides means the advantages clearly outweigh the welfare of purely speculative Martian fungi, right? So the author is not likely to agree with option 1, that space contamination should be minimized until the possibility of life is ruled out, because the author seems to indicate that there has been no possibility of life seen so far, at least, yes, and it's unlikely to be found. Yeah. All right. Let's see the others. The exorbitant costs of continuing to keep the space environment pristine may be unsustainable. Yes. The author says in the very first paragraph that NASA incurs great expense. Yes. And that might be something. So remember, this is a further application question. So based on what the author says, we see if it is compatible with what he says, right? So since he says incurs great expense to prevent the contamination of entirely theoretical biospheres, the author would say that the exorbitant costs are maybe unsustainable. Okay, mind you, it does say maybe, right? It doesn't say are. There's maybe, yes. So the author would agree that the possibility is there. Okay, then that while NASA's earlier missions were not ideal in their approach to space contamination, they likely did no grave damage, right? So this you find from this paragraph, the last but one paragraph, which says NASA's previous human exploration efforts made no serious attempt at sterility with little notice. As the Mars expert Robert Zubrin noted in the National Review, US lunar landings did not leave the campsites cleaner than they found it, right? Didn't really make much difference. Yes, Apollo's bacteria infested litter included bags of feces. Yes, forcing NASA's proposed Mars exploration to do better scrubbing everything and hauling out all the trash would destroy NASA's human exploration budget. So here's confirmation of the second point, right? And encroach on the agency's other directorates, etc., etc. Right? So this tells us that yes, while they were not ideal, they likely did not do any grave damage. Yes. The proposal for a zonal segregation, this you find in the last paragraph, zonal segregation of the Martian landscape into regions for different purpose. Yes, so he says that here, which proposed a system, okay, of zones on Mars, a reasonable compromise, he says. Yes, so because he calls it a reasonable compromise to divide it into zones. Yes, so we can infer from that that the author is likely to agree that the proposal for a zonal segregation into regions for different purposes, we can infer that the author is likely to agree with that. We have here an odd sentence type of question. Okay, so we have 5 sentences. One of them is odd. The other 4 can make a coherent paragraph. Okay, so what does each sentence say? To create a synapse, the neuron has specialized structures, often seen as tiny swellings at its terminal end of the axon, where it stores the chemicals that are emitted to transmit a signal to the next neuron. Okay, so this tells us how, in order to create a synapse, what the neuron has or does. Okay, so that's what the first sentence is talking about. The second sentence says this fetal warm-up act, fetal, a reference, the adjective form of fetus. Yes, so it implies that it is something that is happening at the beginning stages, right, at the fetal stage. Okay, the soldering of neural connections, soldering is putting together, joining together of neural connections before the eyes actually function. Okay, so since it is the fetal act, right, so before the eyes actually function, so it's not as if the eyes have started functioning, is crucial to the performance of, okay, very important to the performance of the visual system. Okay, the reasons for this paring back is cutting back on synapses is a mystery. Okay. Pruning back of synapses is a mystery, but synaptic pruning is thought to sharpen and reinforce the correct synapses while removing the weak and unnecessary ones. All right. So what does the synaptic pruning do? That is cutting back on the synapses. It sharpens and reinforces, strengthens the correct ones while it removes the weak and unnecessary ones. Okay. Neural connections between the eyes and the brain are formed long before birth. Okay, so this is how we know we're talking about a human fetus. It is not just a metaphorical reference to the beginning of something. Okay, so neural connections between the eyes and the brain are formed long before birth, establishing the wiring and the circuitry that allow a child to begin visualizing the world the minute she emerges from the womb. Okay. Yeah. So this actually helps us establish a connection between sentences 2 and 4. Okay, so then we look at sentence 5. During this rehearsal period, synapses, points of chemical connection between nerve cells, are generated in great excess, only to be pruned back during later development. So there's the words. Again, it talks about synaptic pruning, so which is what sentence 3 also talks about. So we find a connection between sentences 3 and 5 also. Okay, so the theme seems to be of the neural connections that are formed during the fetal stage, when the fetus is still in the womb, right? And various connections the developments are taking place. Okay, so the odd one out here would be sentence 1, which talks about how a synapse is created and what the neuron has in order to create the synapse. Okay, so while remember the odd sentence could be taken from a larger paragraph, but this particular sentence would lead on to something and then come to the rest of the sentences. Yes, so as such, with the remaining 4 sentences, sentence 1 is definitely the odd one out, because it doesn't say anything about the pruning of synapses, nor does it say anything about the fetal connections, neural connections that are established during the fetal stage. Okay, we have here another odd sentence question. I would say, the previous one is probably, as long as you don't get caught up in the jargon. Yes, it's a lot of jargon. There's a lot of jargon in this one also, right? So overall, both of these odd sentence questions are tricky. Yes, because if you get caught up in the jargon, if you get lost in the sentences, then it is quite hard to do. It is quite hard to sort of step aside and see things very objectively. All right, let's take a look at this question. Part of the appeal of forecasting is not just that it seems to work, but that you don't seem to need specialized expertise to succeed at it. Okay, so part of the appeal of forecasting. Yes, so that might give us the topic word. Forecasting is not just that it seems to work, okay, but that you don't seem to need specialized expertise to succeed at it. Okay, so you don't need expertise, you don't need specific knowledge, right, in order to be good at forecasting. The tight connection between forecasting and building a model of the world. Okay, so you have the tight connection between forecasting and building a model of the world helps explain why so much of the early interest in the idea came from the intelligence community. Okay, so because there is a connection between forecasting and building a model of the world, that could be the reason that there was so much of early interest, right, from the intelligence community in this idea. Okay, then this was true even though the latter had access to classified intelligence. Yes, so here comes again, so you have the word, so you wonder whom the latter refers to here, but maybe there is some reference, we'll see. Okay, to classified intelligence. Classified is meant for only a few eyes, right? It is not meant to be shared with everyone. Yes, so highly confidential. Okay, one frequently cited study found that accurate forecasters' predictions of geopolitical events, when aggregated, when put together using standard scientific methods, were more accurate than the forecasts of members of the US intelligence community who answered the same questions in a confidential prediction market. Okay, the aggregated opinions of non-experts doing forecasting have proven to be a better guide to the future than the aggregated opinions of experts. Okay, so here you have a reference to opinions of experts and non-experts. Okay, so what works, what is the connection? The theme here seems to be that we don't really need specialized expertise in order to do this forecasting, this prediction, right? Make predictions as such. So there are two sentences at least that talk about experts, yes, expertise. Okay, so there's a reference to that. Yes, so you can see a connection between sentence 5 and sentence 1 and sentence 5. Okay, you also see a connection between sentence 1 and sentence 4 because it says that it not just that it seems to work, but that you don't need specialized expertise to succeed at it. And 4 says one frequently cited study found that accurate forecasters' predictions were more accurate than forecasts of members of the US intelligence community, right? So since sentence 4 says accurate forecasters predictions and for forecasts of members of the US intelligence community, and then you have in sentence 5 you have non-experts and experts, right? So in that case, latter, right? So who had access to classified intelligence? It would obviously be the US intelligence community. Yes, so you find a connection between sentence 3 and 4 also. Right, so 1 and 5 are connected. We had a connection between 3 and 4. Yes, latter. There was also a connection between 1 and 4 and 1 and 5. Yes, so in that case, the one that stands out is option 2. Yeah, while it does talk about the intelligence community, it also goes on a tangent by talking about building a model of the world itself, right? Which is not mentioned or indicated in any of the other sentences. Okay, we have here the next passage. Yes, now this passage might make for rather cumbersome reading, right? Heavy reading for some people at least. Let's see. Languages become endangered and die out for many reasons. Sadly, the physical annihilation of communities. Okay, so this passage is talking about endangered and die out for many reasons. Yes, he or she proceeds to give the reasons for languages becoming endangered and dying out. Okay, so why we lose certain languages, what happens when we lose those languages is what this passage is talking about, right? It also goes on to say that if students pursue languages, if they make an effort to learn languages, especially the ones that are endangered, then we can preserve those languages and thereby preserve the advantages that knowing these languages gives us. Okay, so that's what this passage is about. Okay, so if you look at the last paragraph, you'll see that there is ample evidence that such preservation, meaning the preservation of languages, can work in languages spiraling towards extinction. Okay, for example, that is what kind of preservation? That's what the author says, how these languages can be preserved. He mentions that in the third and fourth paragraphs. Yes. For example, Navajo, Cree, and Inuit communities have established schools in which these languages are the language of instruction, right? So they're the medium of instruction, and the number of speakers of each has increased. So he ends on a positive note by saying that, the preservation has been seen to work. Okay, so the first question says, that is question 9 says, in the context of the passage, which of the following hypothetical scenarios, if true, is not an example of the kind of loss that occurs when a language becomes extinct? Okay, so as I said, the author talks about what happens when a language is lost. All right, so there are hypothetical scenarios, yes, out of which 3 of them do convey the kind of loss that occurs when a language becomes extinct. 1 of them doesn't. Yes. Now, let's first take a look at the paragraph in which this is indicated. Yes. And then we'll go to the options. The third paragraph is the one that indicates this. When we lose a language, right? What happens when we lose a language? We lose the worldview, right? The perspective, the worldview, the broader vision that we have, the broader understanding we have, worldview, culture, and knowledge of the people who spoke it, constituting a loss to all humanity. Okay, people around the world live in direct contact with their native environment, their habitat. When the language they speak goes extinct, okay, when the language they speak goes extinct, the rest of humanity loses their knowledge of that environment okay, their wisdom about the relationship between local plants and illness, their philosophical and religious beliefs, as well as their native cultural expression. Okay, so the native cultural expression, how does their culture get expressed? Okay, so in brackets he says, in music, visual art and poetry, that has enriched both the speakers of that language and others who could have encountered that culture. Okay, so that those are the benefits of knowing these languages, right? There are so many things that we understand when we understand, because we are able to understand the culture about the specific ways of expression that they have, right? Their philosophical and religious beliefs, the wisdom, the knowledge that they have about the relationship between local plants and illness, the knowledge of their environment, right? We lose all of that when the language is lost. Yes, so let's see which hypothetical scenario is not an example of the kind of loss that occurs. The first option says the Inuits of Alaska have 35 different words. Okay, 35 different words to describe the texture of the snow. When the language becomes extinct, we will lose that understanding of nature. Yes, right? Definitely a loss, because if they have 35 different words to describe the texture of snow, so many different, like nature is so versatile, right? And in order to be able to describe that, this particular language culture has 35 different words. Yes, so that is definitely the kind of loss that happens when a language becomes extinct. Yes, it is specialized knowledge. Yes, then the Nicobarese language describes 20 different moods of the ocean. By the time the last speaker is educated in a central board school, right, which is one of the points author makes, how, when a community is destroyed, right, and their language is one of the ways of destroying the community is to make sure that their language is gone, right? And how one way of doing that is by making their children go to a central board school where they don't learn that their language at all, they only learn the mainstream language. Yes, so central board school, they will have forgotten their language, right? So if they've forgotten their language, that is again a loss, yes, of language. So that is also something that indicates the kind of loss that happens when a language becomes extinct. The Lamkangs of Manipur have only 3 remaining native speakers of the language. When they die, we will lose one more group from the government list of indigenous tribes. Okay, this option talks about the loss of an entire tribe, right? While yes, if we stretch that, it means that okay, their language is also gone. Okay, but we are not told by the option that the language is gone, right? So maybe they have passed on the language, we don't know, right? Or maybe that language is also spoken by other tribes, we don't know, right? So there is no mention of something specific to that language which will be lost if that language becomes extinct. Yes. Option 4 says the Andamanese language has a word, right? Please note that the other 3 options talk about the language. Option 3 talks about the tribe. Okay, has a word to describe someone who has lost a stepsister. When the language dies, we will lose the concept of the word and the emotions it evokes, which is another thing which is indicated in the third paragraph. Yes, so option 3 is the answer. Okay, question 10 says it can be inferred from the passage that it is likely South America had a slightly better language survival rate than North America for all of the following reasons except. Okay, so again we are looking at an except question. Now the passage, this you get from the first paragraph, right? The passage itself talks about, North America. Right, it mentions South America towards the end, but that is sort of as a contrast. Yes, so the information we get is about North America. We have to apply it. Okay, so languages become endangered and die out for many reasons. Sadly, the physical annihilation of communities of native speakers is all too often the cause of language extinction. In North America, European colonists brought death and destruction to many Native American communities. This was followed by, okay, so they brought death and destruction. They killed people. This was followed by US federal policies restricting the use of indigenous languages. Look at that. Not only did they kill people and destroy their lands and things like that, they also prevented them from using their languages, including the removal of native children from their communities to federal boarding schools, central boarding schools, where native languages and cultural practices were prohibited. As many as 75% of the languages spoken in the territories that became the United States have gone extinct, with slightly better language survival rates in Central and South America. Okay. So the question is asking us why it is that South America had a slightly better language survival rate than North America. Now we know the reasons for the extinction of languages in North America. Okay, so which are those reasons? The colonial government was unable to mainstream the locals. Yes, so we know that in North America they were able to mainstream the locals. Why? Because they killed people, they destroyed communities, they destroyed their land and property, right? And didn't allow them to speak their language, removed their children and put them in boarding schools where they were not allowed to speak their language. So basically they were taken away from their indigenous communities and forcibly made to be a part of another community, you could say, right? So yes, they were. So in South America, probably they were unable to mainstream the locals. So this is a reason. Not many native speakers were killed. Yes, death and destruction, right? So maybe in South America, they didn't kill that many native speakers. European colonists allowed children of native speakers to stay at home with their families. Yes, in North America, they removed the children from their communities and put them in federal boarding schools. So option 4 has to be the only one. That is not the reason. Locals were provided job opportunities in the colonial administration is something that is not even mentioned in the passage. Right. 11. The author believes that a liberal arts education combined with participation in language preservation empowers students in all of the following ways except. Okay, so again we have an except question. Now where are liberal arts education, where is it mentioned? It is mentioned in the 4th and the 5th paragraphs. Okay, so what do we get? Right, so a liberal arts education combined with participation in language preservation empowers students in all of the following ways except that they will. What is the one thing that they will not do if they are empowered by a combination of both? Yes, so it says mainly from the 5th paragraph, yes, certainly though the vast majority of students will not pursue this kind of activity, right, the kind of activity in linguistics and language preservation. For these students, a liberal arts education is absolutely critical, right? So a liberal arts education is absolutely critical from the twin perspectives of language extinction and global citizenship. Okay, when students study languages other than their own, they are sensitized to the existence of different cultural perspectives and practices. With such an education, students are more likely to be able to articulate insights into their own cultural biases, be more empathetic. Okay, so not just sympathetic, they will actually feel, right, the pain or the emotions of individuals from other cultures, okay, of individuals or other cultures, communicate successfully across linguistic and cultural differences, okay, across linguistic and cultural differences, consider and resolve questions in a way that reflects multiple cultural perspectives, and ultimately extend support to people, programs, practices, and policies that support the preservation of endangered languages. Yes, so when you read this paragraph, look at the points that I have underlined, you will see that what is the one way in which one thing that they will not do? What is that a liberal arts education combined with participation in language preservation? What will it not empower students to do? It will not empower them to establish schools to preserve languages spiraling towards extinction. Establishing of schools is mentioned, but that is in the last paragraph, and that is a specific example that is given. Right? It will help them overcome cultural barriers to communication. Yes, it will help them learn different languages, and it will help them develop a better understanding of their own cultures. Because when they understand cultural biases, when they understand other cultural practices, they see them from the perspective of their own culture. Right? So they are able to understand it better. All right. So option 2 is the one that stands out. Which of the following hypothetical scenarios, okay, so it's not mentioned in the passage, would most strongly undermine the central idea or ideas of the passage? Okay, so which one would undermine, weaken the central ideas of the passage, right? So what is the central idea that we looked at? That language preservation, language extinction causes us to lose out on a lot of things other than just the language, right? The worldview of that culture, the knowledge that they have, so on and so forth. So it is necessary to make sure that language is preserved. It is necessary to do whatever we can to preserve that language, because it helps not just to preserve the language, but also it also helps people who are learning that language, right? So what would undermine the central ideas? Schools that teach endangered languages can preserve the language only for a generation. Okay, right. This is a negative statement, right? But it is actually saying that it can preserve the language only for a generation. So how does that help? How does that weaken the main idea of the passage? The author is advocating the preservation of languages. Yes. So this doesn't help. Option 2 says a liberal arts education requires that in addition to being fluent in English, okay, students gain fluency in 2 of the top 5 most spoken languages globally. Okay, now the author's idea is to preserve the endangered, extinct languages, right? To bring back the extinct languages, or at least prevent further more languages from becoming extinct, right? Now, if the author promotes the liberal arts education, as we just saw for the previous question, because he says that helps students in a number of ways, right? So in that case, if a liberal arts education requires them to be fluent in the mainstream languages, not in the endangered languages, then it definitely weakens the author's idea. Yes, so option 2 is the one that undermines the central ideas of the passage. Okay, option 3 says recording a dying language that has only a few remaining speakers freezes it in time, it stops evolving further. No, even if this might be true, right, that it freezes it forever, there are other ways of preserving it. Yes, so this is just one example that is used in the passage. Most liberal arts students will pursue jobs in publishing and human resource management rather than doctorates in linguistics. Okay, again, taking a doctorate in linguistics is one way, right? Even if they are pursuing jobs in publishing and human resource management, publishing could very well, it could pursue endangered languages also, right? So this is not strong enough to weaken the ideas in the passage, right? Whereas when the author promotes a liberal arts education because he says it helps to preserve languages, and if liberal arts education insists that they learn mainstream languages, then it would weaken the author's idea. Okay, we have here a complete para-completion question. Okay, let's look at the sentence that is provided. This reality is putting stress on employees, okay, who have to pay for transport, desk lunches, more childcare, clothing, and that after-work socialization costs they haven't incurred for nearly 2 years. Okay, right? So, do we put it at the beginning of the passage? No, because it says this reality. So there has to be a reality that is mentioned first, right? So we do not put it in blank 1. Okay. Option 2 says prices are rising at their fastest rate in 40 years. Consequently, so prices are rising at their fastest rate in 40 years. Consequently, okay, return to office related costs have shot up. Think petrol and food, for instance. Yes, so this is another reason. Even if you argue that, this reality, and then the next sentence is talking about the reality, I would say this sentence is actually introducing the idea, right? Whereas the given sentence, which we have to fit into one of the blanks, is, is expanding further on the idea. Okay. So we do not put it here. Also, there's a direct connection between this sentence and the next one, which says, yet wages haven't kept up with inflation, right? So the first sentence is talking about how prices are rising, but unfortunately, wages haven't kept up with inflation, even despite the salary growth many workers have enjoyed during a favorable pandemic labor market. Yes. Then you say, this reality, right? What is the reality? That wages haven't kept up with inflation. So it could fit in here. And the next sentence says, this is especially jarring, right? Because their costs that they haven't incurred for nearly 2 years. Yes, this is especially jarring for workers who are able to save, okay, during remote work when these expenditures, the ones that are mentioned in the given sentence. So option 3 is the best choice, right? And the last sentence just elaborates on that further by saying in April 22, it's a specific example. Almost a London University lecturer told BBC Work Life that they were spending nearly a quarter of what they made every day on return to work costs. Yes, so option 1 blank 3 is the best choice. Okay, we have here another summary question. Again, this passage makes for rather dense reading. Yes, so while it talks about, so there's a word that straight away might cause us to get stuck. Yes, the word tradwife. If you've heard of it, great. If you've not heard of it, then it might just be something that you get stuck on, wondering what on earth it means. Yes, so when the tradwife puts on that Georgic pinstripe dress, she is not just admiring the visual cues of a fantastical past, right? So it's not that she's just admiring a past, yes, something that she seems to be maybe something that she's fantasizing about in the past, right? So she's not just doing that. She takes these dreams of storybook bliss literally. Yeah, she seems to think they're real, tracing them backward in time until she reaches a logical conclusion that satisfies her. And by doing so, she ends up delivering an unhappy reminder, right? So she's, the consequence of it is that she delivers an unhappy reminder, not something that we want to be reminded of just how much our lives consist of artifice and play acting. The tradwife outrages people because of her deliberately regressive ideals. Okay, so tradwife, I think by the time you get to this point, the important thing is to not get stuck on that word, right? Read on and you understand that tradwife here probably is a reference to a traditional wife. Yes, so her deliberately regressive ideals. Yes, so there's a reference to the past, so maybe she's sticking to ideals of the past. Okay, so she outrages people because of her deliberately regressive ideals. And yet, okay, so there's a contrast, there's a contradiction. It's not that it stops there. And yet, her behavior is on some level indistinguishable from the non-trad wives. Yes, so it's not that her behavior is, on some level, there is an absolute similarity to that of the non-trad wife. The tradwife's trollish genius is to beat us at our own dress-up game by insisting that the idyllic cottage daydream should be real, right down to the primitive gender roles, right? The traditional primitive things which we don't necessarily conform to anymore. She leaves the others feeling hollow, cheated. The hula baloo, the noise, right, the confusion and headaches she causes may be the price we pay for taking too many things at face value. Right, so maybe we are taking too many things at face value. Are just desserts served Instagram perfect by a manicured hand on a gorgeous ceramic dish with fat, mouth-watering maraschino cherries on top. Okay, so the author says that it's the price that we pay. What is it? It's something that we deserve because we're taking these things a little too literally. Okay, so let's see what the options say. By promoting an ideal past, the tradwife exposes the artifice of contemporary values and mocks societal norms. So the options are very, very close, all right? And especially since the passage itself is quite dense, this is quite a tricky question to do. But one thing that you probably can understand, especially if you compare the options, is that nowhere does it say that she promotes an ideal past. Right, so it's not that she's actually or actively promoting an idealized past. It says she's not just admiring the visual cues, she takes these streams literally and tracing them backward until she reaches a logical conclusion that satisfies her. Okay, so it is, I would say, one, she's not promoting an idealized past. Also, she's not exposing, she's not mocking. Exposing the artifice of contemporary values might apply. She doesn't mock societal norms. Yeah, it seems to us as if she does. That is the idea. Right? Because we are probably taking too many things at face value. Yes. Then option 2 says the tradwife's commitment to outdated gender. No, right? That it is not the tradwife's commitment to outdated gender roles and retro fashion that critiques the superficiality. It is the tradwife with what she represents. Yes, so both things have to be indicated. Therefore, option 2 doesn't work. Okay, then option 3 says the tradwife with her vintage dress and traditional roles. Yes, right. So the tradwife, along with whatever she does and however she presents herself, highlights the superficiality of modern life and challenges current societal norms. Challenges is a good word. Mocks is an extreme word. Yes. So option 3 is the answer. Okay. Then you have option 4, which says the tradwife's vintage dress and adherence to traditional roles. So as you can see that the commonality between options 2 and 4 both say the tradwife's commitment or the tradwife's vintage dress and adherence to traditional roles reveal the artificial nature. No, it is the tradwife and what she does, how she goes about it. Yes, those are the things that, again, it's not about critiquing, analyzing, or revealing something. It is more that it seems to point out to us, where the word highlights is a good word. Yes, so that's why option 4 is the best choice. Right, we have another para completion here. Let's look at the sentence. Taken outside the village of Trang Bang on June 8th, 1972, the picture captured the trauma and indiscriminate violence of a conflict that claimed, by some estimates, 1 million or more civilian lives. Okay, so the sentence itself is talking about a picture that captured the trauma and indiscriminate violence. Yes, now the paragraph starts by saying the horrifying photograph of children fleeing a deadly napalm attack has become a defining image not only of the Vietnam War but the 20th century. Okay, do we put it after this? At first sight, yes, it does seem like it because it says the picture. Okay, but if you look at the second sentence that is given in the paragraph, you'll see there's a direct connection to the first sentence. Dark smoke billowing behind them. Yes, so what is behind them? There's nothing in the given sentence that could refer to them, whereas in the first sentence it does mention children. Yes, children fleeing, right? So in that case, dark smoke billowing behind them, it's a deadly napalm attack, right? The young subjects' faces are painted with a mixture of terror, pain, and confusion. All right. Do we put it here? No, because the next sentence says soldiers from the South Vietnamese Army's 25th Division follow helplessly behind. Yes, so they are following the children who are fleeing. So there is definitely a connection among these three sentences. Then you put the given sentence because the next sentence says the picture was officially titled The Terror of War, which is it captured the trauma and indiscriminate violence. Yes, what is it? The picture. So it goes on to elaborate upon, not elaborate, but tell you what the picture was called. But the photo is better known by the nickname given to naked 9-year-old at its center, Napalm Girl. Yes, that is the conclusion of the paragraph. Yes, so option 4, blank 3 is the best choice. Okay, that I would say is an easy one to do, right? There are very clear connections. Now we have here another para completion question. This one also has actually a very clear reference because it's a clue that we may not see, but if you watch out for it, then you know it's a good one and it's an easy one. You can find your answer quite easily. Okay, please note the sentence starts by saying many. Okay, many have had to leave their homes behind, with more than 1.3 million people being displaced due to the drought. Okay, it starts by saying Somalia has been dealing with an enormous humanitarian catastrophe driven by the longest and most severe drought. So we know the context. Okay, the country has experienced in at least 40 years. Do we put it here? Many have had to leave their homes behind? No, because the next sentence is elaborating upon it. 5 consecutive, why is it the longest and the most severe drought? 5 consecutive rainy seasons have failed, causing more than 8 million people, almost half of the country's population, to experience acute food insecurity. Okay, do we put it here? No, we don't, because the next sentence says more than 43,000 people are believed to have lost their lives, with half of the lives lost likely being children under 5. Okay, the damage the drought has caused is far reaching. Yes, we put it here. Many have had to leave their homes behind, with more than 1.3 million people being displaced? No, because the next sentence is telling us what the damage is, right? So even though this seems like a damage, you first start by saying farmers have lost all their agricultural income, while pastoralists have lost more than 3 million livestock. Okay, so farmers have lost land, people who reared livestock, right? They lost their livestock, impoverishing entire communities and leaving them on the brink of famine. Yes, many have had to leave their homes behind, with more than 1.3 million people being displaced due to the drought, some like the pastoralists, right? Now, this is where I'm going to point out the clue that I was talking about. See, there's a connection between some and many and some, right? So here it has been inverted. Many has been mentioned first and then the some, but generally the two words go together. So where there is a some, you'll likely find a many following, or where there's a many, you'll find a some following. Okay, so that is actually a good clue, something to watch out for, especially when it comes to para completion. So some, like the pastoralists, may never be able to go back as their livelihoods have been irreversibly wiped out. Yes, so option blank 4, option 4 is the answer. What does this passage talk about? It talks about why or how this particular brand of liquor has become a global sensation, right? The global sensation of the decade, in fact, the passage says. Yes, it goes on to give us information about how, the kind of business that it has done. And it goes on to discuss the factors, yes, the reasons for the success of this particular brand called Mautai. Okay, so it discusses those in the third, fourth, and fifth paragraphs. Yes, goes on to talk about how there are also risks to the success, right? There are things that can affect its success. All right. So let's see what question 17 says. Which of the following is both a reason for Mautai's success as well as a possible threat to that success? Okay. So this is where the author says, yes, Mautai owes its intoxicating success to 3 factors, not all of them easy to imitate. The first one is it profits from Chinese nationalism. That's one of the reasons. Second, it chose to serve China super rich rather than its middle class, right? So it caters to the super rich, not to the middle class. Third, Mautai looks beyond affluent millennials and digital natives. Whom do they target? They target the elderly and the middle-aged. Okay, so these are the reasons given for Mautai's success. Yes. Now, what is a possible risk also to that particular success? Yes, that is mentioned actually in the last 2 paragraphs. It says it has succeeded thanks to nationalism, elitism, and ageism. Okay, but if you look at the last paragraph, it says in the long run, its biggest risk may be millennials. Why? As they grow older, yes, we know that Mautai doesn't target millennials for its success, but as they grow older, right, who? The millennials, health concerns, work-life balance, and the desire for more wholesome pursuits than binge drinking may curb the Ganbei toasting culture on which so much of the demand for the Mautai rests. Yes, for the time being, though, the party goes on. All right. So, Chinese love of liquor-filled celebration. Yes, Chinese nationalism, right? That's part of it. Yes, so that is definitely a reason for the success. Government involvement in its business is mentioned in the last but 1 paragraph, which very clearly indicates government involvement as a risk to Mautai's success. Yes, its appeal to the older age group. That is the one that is definitely, it is the same reason for its success, but it is also a risk. Catering to the elderly. Yes, the elderly is there, but then there are other, age groups that are going to become elderly. So if it is targeting the elderly, the millennials who will turn old, become older, no longer want to drink that way. They don't want to adhere to the toasting culture. Yes, so in that case, that could be a risk. Yes, and its appeal to the rich is the second reason for the success. Okay, the phrase would make it an invention to rival gunpowder has been used in the passage in a sense that. Okay, so this is mentioned in the third paragraph, right, where it says it also claims. Okay, so these are the reasons for Mao Tai's success. Yeah, so it also claims to be hangover proof, which would make it an invention to rival gunpowder, right? So does it mean that gunpowder is also hangover, a cure for hangover? No, right? That's not the thing. So it is not literal, right? It doesn't mean that it is as great an invention as gunpowder in the literal sense. Yes, if it is hangover proof, then yes, it could be something that is as important as it. So there is a comparison that is being made, right? So if it is comparative, then what is the answer? It is metaphorical. The other two options are completely irrelevant because it talks about synonymical, which is synonymous. Yes, so having the same meaning, right? So that doesn't work here at all. Substantive, meaning it supports. Again, it is, what is it supporting, right? What is it confirming? We don't know. Yes, literal and metaphorical, yes, but literal would mean that it actually rivals gunpowder, right? Gunpowder was one of the most powerful inventions because, well, it helped countries protect themselves and also attack and basically colonize and so on and so forth, right? It made them more powerful. Yes, so it is definitely one of the most powerful inventions. Now, can Mao Tai rise to that level of importance? Well, he uses it as a comparison, as an example to convey the idea that if it is hangover proof, which is something that most people would look for in liquor, right, then it is something that would definitely make it a very important thing and would add to its success. Yes, okay. In the context of the passage, we can infer that to succeed in the liquor industry in China, a marketing firm must consider all of the following factors affecting the Chinese liquor market, except. Okay, so this is again a further application question based on what is mentioned in the passage. What should a marketing firm consider? Yes, so the government may control the pricing of the products. Yes, this, as I said, is mentioned in the sixth paragraph, right? So it says here that the government, so Mao Tai is successful, but the risk is that the government is the largest shareholder and a meddlesome one, right? So in the case of Mao Tai, that is definitely there. So yes, if it is if it wants to succeed in the liquor industry in China, a marketing firm must consider the fact that the government may control, right? It says it appears to want prices to remain stable. The competition for winning over the middle class is very stiff. Yes, right? This is the second factor, which says it chose to serve China's super rich rather than its middle class. Markets are littered with the corpses of firms that could not compete in the cutthroat battle. Yeah, it's a cutthroat battle, deadly battle for Chinese middle class wallets. Yes, so Mao Tai didn't even target the middle class because it's a cutthroat battle. Many companies have closed down because of that, right? So yes, this is something that they must consider. There are few competitors, meaning hardly any competitors, to meet the demands of high-end liquor consumers. Yes, because the Mao Tai targeted the rich. Yes, so the super rich, that too. So we know that there are not too many competitors there because they became successful. So the last option, there is money to be made from marketing to the middle class, is the exact opposite of what the passage is telling us. Okay. In the context of the passage, it is most likely that the author refers to Mao Tai's marketing strategy as the unholy trinity because. So we know what the marketing strategy was. It appealed to Chinese nationalism. It chose to serve China's super rich rather than the middle class, and it looked beyond the millennials and the digital natives. It targeted the elderly. Yes, so this is what the author refers to as the unholy trinity, and the author talks about how it is against the Western marketing strategy. Yeah, so look at this. It does this while disregarding every Western marketing mantra. Okay, it is not global. That means it has not spread to other countries. It has meager digital sales and does not appeal to millennials. So what is the strategy? It profits from Chinese nationalism, it chose to serve the super rich rather than the middle class, and it looks beyond millennials and targets the elderly. Okay, so in that case, why does he refer to them as that? It profits from Chinese nationalist feelings. Okay, now this doesn't address the unholy trinity. Yes, so it profits from Chinese nationalist feelings. It exposes the firm to long-term risks, not something that is mentioned. Yes, there is nothing holy. This is just twisting the word unholy, nothing holy about marketing techniques for liquor. This is just twisting the word holy, so it is irrelevant to this. And it contradicts the Western strategy of marketing. Okay, so why is it called the unholy trinity, and why does it refer to this as that? So it disregards every Western marketing mantra. Right, the marketing mantra is it has to be global, it has to appeal to millennials, it has to appeal to the digital natives, as they are referred to in the passage. Mautai doesn't do any of this. Yes, so it basically contradicts the Western strategy of marketing. Yes, so that's why option 4 is the best choice. We have here another passage. So this passage, I'm sure, will appeal to a lot of people, but it also brings in a slightly philosophical idea of how AI. So this is also the debate that is taking place, right? So the author discusses AI's ability to manipulate and generate language, right? And how that could have a profound, a deep effect on society. And without regulating AI, that could actually, if AI is not regulated, it could actually affect democracy. Yes, so that's what the passage is about loosely. Yes, let's start with this, the tone of the passage. Okay, so again, we are looking at the opinion, attitude of the author. We'll take a quick look at the first and the last paragraphs, which say, fears of artificial intelligence have haunted humanity since the very beginning of the computer age. Hitherto, these fears focused on machines using physical means to kill, enslave, or replace people. We have a lot of movies which are based on that, right? But over the past couple of years, new AI tools have emerged. Okay, now the author's concern is not about the physical means. He says new AI tools have emerged that threaten the survival of human civilization from an unexpected direction. Okay, AI has gained some remarkable abilities to manipulate and generate language, whether with words, sounds, or images. AI has thereby hacked the operating system of our civilization. What is the operating system of our civilization according to the author? Language. Okay, we just take a look at the last paragraph because that's where the idea is wound up. We can still regulate the new AI tools, but we must act quickly. Whereas nukes cannot invent more powerful nukes, AI can make exponentially more powerful AI. Unregulated AI deployments would create social chaos, which would benefit autocrats and ruin democracies. Democracy is a conversation, and conversations rely on language. When AI hacks language, it could destroy our ability to have meaningful conversations, thereby destroying democracy. And the first regulation I would suggest to make it mandatory for AI to disclose that it is an AI. If I am having a conversation with someone and I cannot tell whether it is a human or AI, that's the end of democracy. This text has been generated by a human, or has it? Right? So he ends on a slightly humorous note. Okay. Now, what is the tone of the passage? The first option says quizzical. Now, quizzical has two meanings. You can either use it in the sense of teasing, or you can use it in the sense of asking questions. Okay. While you might look at that, it goes on to say, as the passage poses several questions, concluding with the question of whether or not the passage or passage content has been generated by AI. This is a little too literal. Right? So it is definitely not teasing, other than that last sentence. And that also is not meant to be teasing because the overall tone of the passage is not humorous. Yes. So that is why it is not this thing. And the author doesn't just pose questions, the author gives the answers. Yes. So for two reasons, we eliminate option 1. Cautionary, right? Because the author lays out some adverse effects of the proliferation of unregulated AI tools, which is what we read in the last paragraph, right? So the author is giving a warning. He doesn't just ask questions. He's not being humorous overall, he is giving a warning. Right? Alarmist is unnecessarily creating alarm. There is nothing unnecessary about this, right? The author is very clear that AI can hack language, and language is the operating system of our civilization, and that can affect our democracy. Yes, therefore option 3 doesn't apply. Prescient is being able to predict the future. Okay, as the author analyzes the future impact of the use of new AI tools on crucial areas of our society and culture. Well, I would say option 4 is not applicable for two reasons. One is prescient. Prescient implies being able to predict the future very accurately, right? That's one thing that's a little extreme for this. And the other one says, as the author analyzes the future impact, okay, he analyzes the future impact, but it leaves out the aspect of how, right, it could, he gives a warning. He says that he doesn't just analyze, he actually gives a warning saying that it shouldn't be left unregulated because it could affect democracy. Yes, so option 2 is the best choice. Okay, we can infer that the author is most likely to agree with which of the following statements. All right, having gotten an idea of the overall passage, let's look at the options. Apart from its drawbacks, AI tools have been beneficial in boosting technological and industrial advance worldwide. So you can eliminate option 1 because of the word beneficial. The author is not really talking about the positive effects. The author is talking about, right from the first paragraph, he jumps into the negative effects. Then, the commonly expressed fear that future AI developments will fatally harm humans, okay, is unfounded. I would say this is inappropriate for two reasons. One, it doesn't say anything about fatally harm humans, right? That is the mention of the physically harm in the first paragraph. But the author's concern is about how it can hack into our language system. Yes, so that is out. And it also, option 2 also says it is unfounded. Actually, the author doesn't say anywhere that the fears about AI are unfounded. Yes, then one of the biggest casualties from the spread of unregulated AI is likely to be the democratic process. Yes, this sums up the idea of the passage. Yes, and people's fears of the dangers of students using ChatGPT and other new AI tools are unfounded. Again, nothing unfounded here, nothing without proof or evidence here, right? The author is telling us that it can cause trouble. Okay. Question 23 says the author terms language the operating system of our civilization for all of the following reasons except. Yes. So again, all of the following reasons. Now it is in the first paragraph that the author says AI has thereby hacked the operating system of our civilization, which is language. Okay. Now, is the basis of AI tools like ChatGPT, which can be used to generate academic content and opinion, right? No, this is not something that the author is concerned about. Option 2 says is fundamental to the articulation and spread of human values and culture in our society, right? So if you look at paragraph 2, this is where you will find this. Language is the stuff that almost all human culture is made of. Human rights, for example, aren't inscribed in our DNA. Rather, they are cultural artifacts we created by telling stories and writing laws. Gods aren't physical realities. Rather, they are cultural artifacts we created by inventing myths and writing scriptures. What would happen once a non-human intelligence becomes better than the average human at telling stories, composing melodies, drawing images, and writing laws and scriptures? Right? Then it goes on to talk about that. Yes. So, is fundamental to the articulation and spread of human values and cultures is what he's saying by talking about cultural artifacts. Yes, has laid the foundation for the creation of cultural artifacts through writing and telling of stories is also mentioned in the second paragraph, and can influence political views and opinions as it engenders is creates close emotional ties among people is mentioned. If you look at the last sentence of this paragraph, yes, think of the next American presidential race in 2024 and try to imagine the impact of AI tools that can be made to mass produce political content, fake news stories and scriptures for new cults. Yes. So basically the implication there is AI can do everything that language can do, right? So what can language do? Language can influence political views and opinions as it genders close emotional ties among people. Yes. So we get all of these, right, as the reason for the author to call language the operating system of our culture, of our civilization. Whereas he doesn't call it the basis for AI tools like ChatGPT. Yes, and that too, which can be used to generate academic content and opinion. Let's look at this question. The author identifies all of the following as dire outcomes of the capture of language by AI, except. Okay, so what are the dire outcomes of the capture of language by AI? Okay, one is not a dire outcome, as mentioned by the author. Let's see. Eventually subvert. Subvert is to overturn. Yes, so eventually subvert democratic processes through the mass creation and spread of fake political content and news. This we get more or less from the last paragraph where we read, yes, that AI can make exponentially more powerful AI, etc., etc. It would create social chaos, which would benefit autocrats and ruin democracies. Democracy is a conversation, and conversations rely on language. Okay, when AI hacks language, destroy our ability to this, etc., etc. Yes, so we know that it can destroy democracy. Outstrip human creativity and endeavors in such spheres, in the spheres such as art and music, and in the formulation of laws, we get from the second paragraph, right? It says here, what would happen once a non-human intelligence becomes better than the average human at telling stories, composing melodies, drawing images, and writing laws and scriptures. Okay, so yes, there is the fear that it would outstrip creativity. Apply its mastery of language to create strong emotional ties, which could exacerbate the polarization of political views. Okay, so this is one thing, because it says apply its mastery of language to create strong emotional ties. Strong emotional ties which could exacerbate is worsen, yes, the polarization. See, it says that it could influence political views, right? It also says that it can form intimate relationships with people and use the power of intimacy to change our opinions and worldviews. But it doesn't say anything about making the polarization. Polarization is division of political views. That is a little too specific. Yes, so that's why option 3 is the one that the author doesn't mention. It's an exaggeration of what the author says. Yes, option 4 says spawn a completely new culture through its ability to create new ideas and opinions. Yes, right. So this is something again that the author could say, right? If you look at the fourth paragraph, what will happen to the course of history when AI takes over culture, begins producing stories, melodies, etc., etc. Previous tools like the printing press and radio helped spread the cultural ideas of humans, but they never created new cultural ideas of their own. Okay, so press and radio helped spread the cultural ideas, right? But AI can create its own. It can create completely new ideas, completely new culture. Yes, what is spawn? Spawn means create. Yes, so option 4 is something that the author predicts as a dire outcome.